All right, to pick up where we left off, toward Wano Picchu. The little group set out slowly, scampering in single file. Professor Sagefur was right. Even the slightest bit of effort was difficult for those who were not used to the altitude. Without the llamas, they would have been able to bring all the equipment and food they needed. As the path climbed higher, it became narrower and rockier. "This is an old Incan road," explained the professor. "Look at the cobblestones. Do you see the spot where they're not covered up by plants and shrubs? They are all placed together using the same technique. The Incas were a great people and wonderful builders." "What do you think Gonzalo is looking for up there on Wano Picchu?" asked Paulina. Professor Sageford didn't answer right away. He stopped to check on the rest of the mouselings. Everyone was tired, except for Pamela and Paulina. Some mice adapt more easily to the altitude. Not far away was a clearing that was big enough to set up camp. "Let's stop there," the professor proposed. "We can rest and drink some hot tea, and I will tell you Gonzalo's story. Then we will set up the tents for nightfall." When they all had settled in with their piping hot cups, the professor began to tell the story. "Our tale begins a long time ago in 1532, when the conquistadors arrived in Peru. They were under the command of Francisco Pizarro. The Spanish had never in their lives seen so many riches. They took Atahualpa, the emperor of the Incas, as their prisoner, and they forced the Incas to pay an enormous ransom for him. So the Incas filled Atahualpa's entire cell with gold. Then they filled 2 more rooms with silver. All that was just a tiny portion of the immense treasure of the Incas. Most of it was hidden and never found again." "And now Gonzalo is looking for the hidden treasure?" Paulina asked breathlessly. The professor nodded. "The legend speaks of a secret city built in order to save the treasure from greedy invaders. A sort of enormous safe," interrupted Nikki. Professor Sage first smiled. "Exactly. Mice have searched for the safe for centuries. Hiram Bingham, the explorer, thought he had found it when he discovered Machu Picchu, but there were no traces of the treasure. After many disappointments, he ended up believing that the secret city was just a legend." "But your son doesn't believe that's true?" asked Colette. The professor shook his snout. "Ever since he was little, Gonzalo has dreamed of finding the Inca's treasure. He studied a lot and became an expert archaeologist. His greatest fear is that the secret city will be found by unscrupulous rodents. Some mice are capable of destroying important evidence of a great civilization if it means they can go home rich. But Gonzalo longs to discover the secret joy, not to become rich, but for the joy of knowledge, because in the end there is no wealth greater than knowledge. Remember this, mouselings. It is very important to discover the past if you want to understand the present." The Thea sisters nodded. They were impressed by the professor's devotion to knowledge. Violet nudged Nikki. "Doesn't he remind you of Thea?" she whispered. "That sounds like something she would squeak." Suspended in thin air. Bright and early the next morning, the mouselings and Professor Sagefur set off together. Everyone had energy than a pack of rats at the World Cheese Convention. Even Colette, Nikki, and Violet were getting used to the altitude. The path they were following twisted around the side of a mountain. After many bends and turns, the explorers found themselves on the other side with a vast gorge in front of them. There was no road. They reached the end of a high cliff. At the bottom of the gorge below was a rocky stream. There was only one way forward on a narrow bridge made of rope. "Looks like we've reached the end of the line," declared Nikki. "Chewy cheese curds! I thought things like this happened in the movies," exclaimed Pamela. "It's not as fragile as it looks," said Paulina. "I crossed one a few years ago, and it was much easier than I expected." The suspension bridge was made of agave fiber, threaded together into many cables. At its bottom, there was a narrow platform of wooden planks designed to make crossing easier. Paulina had already begun to step forward, but Professor Sagefur stopped her. Wait, Paulina, I'll go first. I want to see if it is as strong as it seems. The professor took a few quick steps. Soon he'd reached the center of the bridge. Suddenly he began to jump up and down. Thump, 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 thump. Colette, Nikki, Pamela, and Violet shot one another looks of bewilderment. What is he doing? Has he shorted a circuit in his brain? Pamela exclaimed. Petrified. Nikki was stunned. Does he think he's a kangaroo? I think the cheese has slipped off his cracker, murmured Colette. Stop, Professor, stop. It's dangerous, begged Violet. Her fur had turned as white as mozzarella. But the professor just laughed, and he bounced up and down. Don't worry, my little cheddar crisps. This bridge is solid. If a stout old mouse like me can use it as a trampoline, it should be safe for us, the llamas, and all the equipment. Suddenly, the professor noticed Violet's pale snout. Are you all right, Violet? Are you afraid of heights? Violet was squeakless with fright. Her eyes were fixed on the bottom of the ravine. It was all she could do to nod. Professor Sagefur scampered back to the mouselings and put a paw around Violet's shoulder. Don't think about it. Help me make sure the packages on the llamas are balanced evenly. Meanwhile, your friends can go ahead. Paulina went first. She scampered forward very slowly, but without hesitation, keeping her steps even. When she'd reached the other side, she turned around and shouted encouragement to her friends. You see, it hardly rocks at all. Professor Sagefur laughed. Good job, Paulina. Now come on, mouselings. Have courage. Let's hurry up. I'm as hungry as a mountain lion. Nikki and Colette were next. They looked a bit uncertain, but they went ahead. Violet didn't feel ready yet. Why don't you stay here with her? The professor suggested to Pamela. I'll take the llamas to the other side and then come back to get you. The llamas seemed perfectly at ease on the wobbly bridge. One got a little nervous when the professor tried to put a rope around its neck. Then it yanked itself free, spit in Professor Sagefur's snout, and crossed the bridge in a hurry. Leapin' llama legs, sputtered the professor, wiping his snout with one paw. That was truly awful. Pamela burst out laughing, and even Violet cracked a smile. Slowly, Violet, Pam, and Professor Sagefur stepped onto the bridge. From down below, they could hear the rumble of the angry river current. As you walk, try to think about something else, the professor advised Violet. Concentrate on something nice. Violet nervously nodded. She began humming to a sweet song that her grandmother Lotus Flower had always sung when she tucked Violet in for the night. Despite herself, Violet smiled. Holding tight to the happy memory, Violet took one paw step at a time. Before long, she had reached the other end of the bridge. Ka-caw! The professor squeezed Violet's paw. Great job, my dear. You did it. You were very brave. Professor, come take a look, Paulina called in a loud squeak. She'd been looking for a good place to rest, and she'd come across the remains of another campsite. Someone stopped here. Maybe it was Gonzalo, exclaimed Pamela. It could be. Yes, these paw prints look fresh, confirmed the professor, examining the signs of the ground. Just then, a deafening shriek came out of nowhere. Caw! Professor Sagefur and the Thea sisters pressed themselves up against the side of the cliff and covered their ears. Caw! Terrified, the three llamas ran away. Caw! What makes that terrible sound? Caw! It's the coonter, yelled Pamela, pointing toward the sky. Behind the dark clouds that were covering the sun in the shadow of a bird, an enormous bird. It's going to attack us, cried Nikki. Seek shelter quickly, shouted the professor. Caw! This time his condor's cry was followed by a sinister hiss, but no one looked to see where it came from. They were running. Everyone raced for shelter as fast as they could, the mouselings and Professor Sagefur. Were so busy scurrying away, they accidentally split up. Violet, Pam, and the professor turned right. After a few feet, they found shelter in a cave. Nikki, Paulina, and Colette ran the other way to the left, but they weren't as lucky as their friends. They couldn't find anywhere to hide, and the cries of the condor were getting closer and closer. At last, Nikki, Paulina, and Colette saw some bushes and jumped into them. Before they realized what was happening, the ground crumbled underneath their paws. "Help!" yelled the mouselings. "Help!" The 3 mouselings slid and slid and slid. Down, down, and down they went. All around them it was darker than the inside of a cat's mouth. The rock underneath their tails was moist from the moss. There was nothing to grab. "I feel like I'm on a water slide without the water," cried Nicky. "How can you joke at a time like this?" cried Colette. "Will we ever hit the bottom?" Paulina wondered aloud as she bumped along, until suddenly, thump, their long tumble was over at last. For a few minutes there was only silence. Then one at a time the 3 mouselings began to squeak. "Oh, oh, oh," moaned Colette. "Is everyone all right?" cried Paulina. "No, of course not. Nothing is all right," shouted Colette. "We've fallen into the middle of a mud puddle. My tail is all bruised. I think I tore a hole in my pants, and here's the straw that broke the llama's back. I broke a paw nail." A bright light shining at her snout silenced Colette. Nicky had pulled out her pocket flashlight and was aiming it at her friend. "Oh, Colette, don't be such a drama mouse. Come on, get up." Paulina scrambled up and brushed herself off. "Let's see if we can figure out where we've ended up." She helped Colette up while Nicky led the way. The light from the flashlight was very dim, but little by little the mouselings' eyes got used to the dark. They advanced along a tunnel that was narrow but tall enough to stand up in. The walls were weirdly smooth. Even the ground seemed to be paved. Despite the lack of light, Paulina, Nicky, and Colette scampered along quicker than gerbils on a treadmill. "It almost seems as if someone dug this tunnel out of the rock," observed Paulina. "You're right," replied Nicky. Just then the flashlight's beam fell on a statue. "Holy cheese, that's scary. What is it?" exclaimed Colette. "It's an Incan sculpture," said Paulina. She stepped closer to get a better look. "I wonder if it's some sort of guardian," mused Nicky. "A guardian of what?" asked Paulina. Nicky slowly aimed the flashlight along the wall. At first it appeared blank, but then she spotted an opening. "Of that door," she gasped. Tune in next time to find out what happens next.